We now move to our first In Conversation of the day, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our first In Conversation list. General Sir Richard Barrons, KCB, CBE, former commander of Joint Forces Command in the British Army and one of the most distinguished military leaders of his generation, currently co-chairman of UDSS, who will be in conversation with Nicola Watkinson, Managing Director International at TheCityUK. Can you please welcome them?
We're here?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Well, it's lovely to be up here on the stage today. And any of those who know me know that I spent my former career as a diplomat. And when you're a diplomat, even one in the Australian diplomatic service, you spend a lot of time being asked to think about the bigger picture. So while we're all thinking about trade and investment, we spend a lot of time in our world thinking about where is this going to lead us? And so it's a great pleasure to be able to sort of lift up the conversation for a moment now from some of the discussions that we've just had on geopolitics to really look at what I think is a hugely emerging trend, which is the nexus between defence, security and trade and what that means for our industry. And there's no better person to help us to do that than Richard. So Richard, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
The first thing I wanted to really ask is about the fact that you have served at the highest level, really, at the Ministry of Defence. And we have just talked about the changing world order and things that are coming through. What do you think is the sort of defining characteristic of this world order that we're now coming into?
So good morning. I mean, I think the previous panel captured this really well. That everybody in this room has survived and prospered in the comfort of the post-Cold War era. And that is over. And we would argue when it finished, because it was a process, but probably by about 2014, in the invasion of Crimea, we'd find a benchmark there. And we now all live, and we didn't ask for it, but we do all live in a world which has returned us to having to manage existential risk to our security, our prosperity and our values. And the challenge is we're still in a lag where we would love to be in the old world with a single superpower, a rules-based international order that we had largely designed in the West from 1945. And now it's really different. And some of this existential risk is historically familiar, and some of it has never happened before in the history of mankind. So we live in a multipolar world. The panel has defined how you can capture this as a conversation between liberal democracy, led by the US probably, and autocratic capitalists led by China, but with Russia very much in the vanguard if you live in Europe. And a whole lot of the rest of the world looking on and wondering if they have to choose, and if they do, who might they choose? And it's not necessarily the West in the way it would have been 20 years ago. But that's not new. We've done great power confrontation before in history, but we've never done it before in an environment where our planet is unable to sustain our expectations and our abuse. And it's the instability of population growth and climate change which is going to stoke and provide the menu for great power confrontation. And on top of that, we've never had the digital age before, which is reshaping how you do confrontation and conflict, as well as how you live and how you work. And we've had nuclear weapons before, but we've never lived in a world where nuclear weapons are seen by some as actually usable and not linked to mass extinction. And if you bundle those things together, great power confrontation, multipolar world, instability of climate change, the transformative effect of the digital age, and the proliferation and potential usability of nuclear weapons, well, that's a handful.
It absolutely is. Gee, I'm feeling nervous already about how we're going to be able to manage that. And I think, one of the things that we really need to think about then is, in this year of elections, we've got some pretty big ones coming up. I think we all know about the US election. We've also got elections in the EU, as well as with other major trading partners. As you look at maybe things like the EU and the US elections, what kind of signals do you think we need to be looking for about what some of the potential ramifications might be for defence and security?
So I think in both cases it's profound. In my lane, defence and security, regardless of the outcome of the US presidential election, the United States has been saying for more than a decade that it's going to have to rewrite the transatlantic security arrangement that it's underpinned since 1947, which means that currently the US taxpayer pays for 70% of NATO defence spending. And the US is signalling collectively, and it's not new, that their priority is now Asia, it's China, that they have a debt of about 100% of GDP, so money is going to get tight. They have major issues on their southern border, which make the arrival of small boats at Dover look irrelevant. And we're now in a place where the US economy, I think, is about $23 trillion GDP a year. And Europe, including the UK, because geography has not changed, is now about $17.5 trillion a year. So why is the US taxpayer subsidizing our security when they need to do other things? And this is the 75th birthday of NATO. It's been the world's most successful defense alliance. It is now going to change, and the US election will dictate the pace and the quality of that change. So that is absolutely profound to the security of Europe and frankly, defence spending. For the EU, I think the EU's heart is in having an election which they'd like to have more of the same. How do they translate the prosperity that they have and just parcel it out and protect it? The conversation they've actually got to have is how does the EU, with less US support coming, deal with this confrontation with Russia in short order, and the certainty that that European voice of 500 million people is going to have to find its place in this conversation with China, because the rules are not going to be the ones that we would love to stick with and once thought maybe were guaranteed in perpetuity. The challenge for the EU is, alone in big power brokers in the world, it's disinclined to align political power, let alone military power, with its economic power. And unless it starts to do that, it for really bad reasons, could become the sort of standing victim of the 21st century. That's just not in our interests.
Okay, and I think that really gives us some food for thought, because many of us here in the room, we sit on boards, we sit at the Exco, we're really thinking about the work that we do here in the UK and how, as businesses, we try and sustain and deliver further growth. What are some of the sort of issues that you think, from a business perspective, we need to be taking into account?
So I think there are three things, and this may be really unkind because I'm just not a commercial type, but the many companies I deal with, I generally find I find leaders who are focused on the next quarter, and they understand a spreadsheet, and they have a sense that they operate with a safety net of a world that goes their way. That's gone. So I think the imperative for most businesses is that they need to understand this horizon we've been talking about all morning, because in there are risks and huge opportunities. But if you haven't got an eye on the horizon as well as an eye on the spreadsheet of the next quarter, you're going to fall over your own feet eventually. The second aspect I think of this is boards must grip resilience. We're having a better conversation about cyber risk and how that's not a thing the technical people do. That's the thing the board and the C-suite own, and you design it into your organization, or you will be done over. I mean, if you don't think you've been penetrated, you've been penetrated. It's more than that. It's about how you understand the fragility of your supply chain, particularly if you're part of a globalized trading network. How you consider the amount of inventory that you hold, because you're going to have to withstand interruptions and shocks. I mean, look at the experience of Dubai Airport yesterday. This is not just about conflict, it's about climate change. And you're going to have to understand how you grow and retain talent to operate in this world. And this is made much harder because, as many people now recognize, since the advent of the smartphone, we have developed a generation of adults who, in many cases, are poorly equipped to deal not just with the world they love to be in, which is quite comfortable, but absolutely not equipped to deal with a world that is, I'm going to use a Clausewitzian phrase here, going to bite them in the arse sooner or later. And that makes the people think harder. But if a business doesn't think about resilience coherently, it's just inviting itself to be done over. And then there is the third bit, which is about opportunity. So in this world of existential risk, where markets will change, nations will change, alliances will change, technology will change. For the people who are agile enough, if they're able to grip not just technology, but off the back of it, new ways of organizing and new ways of operating, there are fortunes to be made.
And if I could just maybe pick up on that piece, because I think the Defence Forces is in a great way in which we can see examples of how you're changing the way in which decisions are made, in which groups are organised. I think, when we think back to the military, many of us who studied it in history, it was on one big battlefield with the two sides lined up against each other on either side. But now what we're seeing is that is becoming much more localized, much more into sort of close conflict. Often there's a lot of ambiguity. There's the sort of the VUCA world that we all hear about. And the military really seems to be responding in terms of how decisions are made, how it structures and organizes itself. Are there lessons for the corporate world in some of this as well, do you think?
Yes, there are, and I would say the military problem in many ways is more acute. So all European nations have the armed forces that they have developed through the comfort of the post-Cold War. And that means they've made them smaller and less ready and actually less well trained and more isolated from society. And that's explicable, but now we're in this much more difficult world. Well, that recipe won't work. And if you look at Ukraine, it is reminding us that confrontation and conflict is a whole of society effort. The armed forces are an important part of it, but Ukraine wins or loses if it mobilizes civil society and industry and our industry. And we've not thought about that. So one aspect is how we now bring together a whole of society effort to be resilient, to stand up for our interests, and if necessary, to fight, because that's where the people and the innovation comes from. And for the armed forces, almost all the technology that's going to transform them, so cloud, AI, obviously data, robotics, autonomy, bioscience, nanotechnology, that's all in the civil sector. It's all developed by people who are doing it for quite different reasons, who don't understand the military. And the military know they're going to grow armies, navies, and air forces that are manned, unmanned, and autonomous, mixing increasingly autonomous. And they need technology that's come out of the civil sector. So the military know where they're headed. They don't know how to get there. And they need technology that they frankly don't understand, and in many cases can't afford to develop. And we need a whole of society effort to get in the way. So that conversation about resilience and seizing opportunity in commerce is the same conversation that's happening with different objectives in the military. And an important part of that is you aren't going to win that if you adopt the fetal position under your duvet and hope the world goes away. You'll just get done over. And if you're the UK, you're only going to succeed if you bind with your allies. It's about collective security. So when we had that conversation about how you find markets with friends around the world, it's the same in collective. And we should align these things, because the UK and France and Germany will not make their way in the world unless they integrate the public sector, including the military, with the greater power of the private sector. Sometimes we talk about that in the arena of sanctions, but this is way more about how you build resilient societies that can seize opportunity and lead, in the case of the UK, have a leading voice in a collective response.
I think that's a really important message for the industry here, because I think traditionally we've tended to think that we can stand a little bit apart from, not just from politics, but from defence and security as well, and just pursue our own agenda. But it sounds like there's some things we need to be thinking about as an industry on how we actually think about that broader linkage.
So this is a profoundly important point. So people, when they think about war, they tend to think this is a thing people in uniform do somewhere over there. But actually, war is a battle of wills between societies. And if I was invited to, and I'd love to be, by the way, invited to make war against France, say,
Reminds me of Yes Minister.
And I was told, but you may not put a single boot on the ground. I can break any modern European country in a fortnight, and I would, by the application of cyber, of long-range precision missiles, and above all, the manipulation of social media to tell every resident of France that their life is over unless they now cooperate with me. And my target in that is not the armed forces of France, impressive actually, though they are, in a small and rather Gallic way. It's industry, it's civil society. I need people to understand that there's no power, there's no water, there's no industry, there's no jobs, there's no school, there's no banking. So industry has to understand, and the financial sector more than anybody, that in this world of existential conflict, it's not just on the pitch, it's the primary target, and it's got to play its part.
Thank you very much. And I think that is very much something that we're going to have to leave you all with as you think about how you're going to reflect that in your business. But it is something I think I saw when I lived in the US. I think we see it in large parts of Asia as well. Yeah. This need to really lean in and understand from a business perspective how these risks are going to not just impact us, but how we lean in to be part of the solution. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.